Welcome, everyone. Good evening. My name is Olga Shurchkov, and I'm the faculty director of the Albright Institute. Hello. Welcome, welcome. I'm sorry to interrupt your wonderful conversations, but it is time to start our formal programming. And I'm delighted to welcome my former colleague in the economics department. Well, let's face it, my current colleague also in the background, and the provost of the college, Courtney Coyle, to introduce our speakers today. Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you, Olga. Once a colleague, always my colleague. So thank you so much. Welcome. It's great to see everybody here. Let me add my welcome to Olga's. This annual dialogue is always a much anticipated event at the college, and it perfectly caps the Albright Institute's winter session. We're so glad that you could join us, including the many friends of the Institute who are watching on the live stream. It's my privilege to announce this evening's speakers, Ambassador Michele Sison, Wellesley class of 1981, and our own Stacie Goddard, the Betty Freyhof Johnson 44 Professor of Political Science at Wellesley College and Associate Provost for Wellesley and the World. So first I want to congratulate the Albright Institute team on this event and for yet another successful winter session. In addition to Olga, that team includes Program Director Katie Michaels, Project Coordinator Julie Lanza, and Assistant Director of Academic Conferences Beth Robichaud. Each of you is a treasure, an amazing team. Thank you so much. I also want to thank a few very special individuals who are with us this evening. First, please help me in thanking Alice Albright for joining us. We're so appreciative to have you here and continuing to ensure that Wellesley is central to your mother's legacy. It means so much that you've stayed close to the Institute. Thank you. We also want to acknowledge Winnie Freund, class of 59, who's a classmate and dear friend of Secretary Albright's, as well as Joe Joyce, another colleague of mine, the M. Margaret Ball Professor of International Relations and Professor of Economics, for their critical involvement in the founding of the Institute and their continued support of its programming. We're so grateful. Finally, I want to congratulate this year's Albright Fellows on their work on what I know was a very intense but also rewarding 2 weeks. It's always so inspiring to see the projects that you create together, a truly interdisciplinary and collaborative process that's really the best of experiential learning. Your work reflects the kind of deep, rigorous, and globally aware liberal arts education that Wellesley prides itself on. This year, guided by our faculty and staff, and it's so wonderful to see so many of you joining us here tonight, you tackled work centered on a theme that could not be, unfortunately, more relevant to the troubled times we find ourselves in today. That theme, leadership in a fragmented world, which we will continue to explore tonight, is one that I'm confident Secretary Albright herself would have spoken to with eloquence and forcefulness. The Secretary, of course, had a profound understanding of the many interlocking global challenges the world faces, and she knew those challenges demanded ethical, compassionate, and competent leaders who seek peace, champion human rights, and who defend democracy above all else. These foundational ideals drove her belief in Wellesley's responsibility to help educate, inspire, and prepare the next generation for leadership in global affairs. We honor her memory and her legacy with the seriousness and sophistication of the work the Institute supports and advances, the work of educating our fellows, and the kind of public-facing dialogue that we're here to take part in tonight. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, beginning with this year's Mary Jane Durnford Lewis 59 Distinguished Visiting Professor. Ambassador Michele Sison, a longtime diplomat who served the U.S. across the globe, is one of the foremost leaders on issues of migration, who's dedicated herself to the countering of the trafficking of human beings, among other important causes. She's a fierce supporter of building peace and preventing conflict where it's needed most. She's currently the director of the International Organization for Migration's Global Office in Washington, D.C. In her role at IOM, she leads efforts to strengthen partnerships and advance engagement with U.S.-based institutions. Michele has over 4 decades of experience in the Foreign Service, including, prior to her work at IOM, as U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for International Organization Affairs. As an ambassador, she's held posts in some of the world's most complex diplomatic landscapes. She was U.S. Ambassador to Haiti, to Sri Lanka and the Maldives, to Lebanon, and to the United Arab Emirates, as well as serving as U.S. Deputy Representative to the United Nations. Her service has earned her the rank of Career Ambassador, the highest rank in the U.S. Foreign Service. Over her decades of public service, Michele's dedication and strategic leadership has been honored with many awards, such as the U.S. Presidential Distinguished Service Award, the U.S. Presidential Meritorious Service Award, and the U.S. Department of Army's Outstanding Civilian Service Medal. We are so proud to have as our distinguished visiting professor a leader who is so committed to solving global challenges and to the protection of democratic values. And tonight we are truly fortunate to be able to learn from her deep experience in humanitarian affairs and diplomacy. Ambassador Sison will be joined in conversation by Stacie Goddard, the Betty Freyhof Johnson 44 Professor of Political Science at Wellesley College and Associate Provost for Wellesley and the World. Professor Goddard is a deeply respected colleague, an influential scholar of international relations, and a dedicated citizen leader here at Wellesley, and a friend. Got to claim you as a colleague, too. She's also a former faculty director for the Albright Institute. Stacie's area of expertise is in international security with a specific focus on legitimacy, rising powers, and territorial conflict, what she describes as questions of great power competition and international order. Professor Goddard often shares her analyses and insights to add to public discourse and educate policymakers, something we value greatly at Wellesley. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Foreign Affairs, among others. She's a series editor for Columbia University Press. She just recently published a new paper with Georgetown University professor Abraham Newman on neo-royalism, the Trump administration, and the emerging international system. This paper has drawn the attention of Politico and Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman. Professor Goddard's most recent book, When Right Makes Might, Rising Powers and World Order, was published by Cornell University Press. Her research informs her teaching, which includes a seminar on great power competition, a course on dangerous ideas and international order, and a course on nuclear politics. She believes that understanding issues of war and peace is essential to educating global citizens. So with that, please help me welcome these two extraordinary women to the stage.
Courtney, thank you so much for that really kind welcome and introduction. Thanks to all of you who are here to listen to us. As you can imagine, there's not much going on, so it was kind of hard to put things together tonight, but we'll do our best to make things interesting. Michele, it is such an honor to have you here, and I want to be able to touch on what you're doing now on issues of migration, talk a bit about your career, and then maybe end up with some advice, especially for the students here. But I want to start with your career, and especially where you are now. Career Foreign Service Officer, but just this summer, you changed jobs, and you are now a Director of Global Affairs for the International Organization of Migration, which is obviously the primary organization within the United Nations system dealing with issues of migration. It's a challenging time on issues of migration. Just to kind of put some context, because obviously we know this, I think many people know this from a local perspective, from a global perspective. In 2024, there are 304 million people living outside of the country where they were born. And 30% of those people were living outside of the country they were born because they were forced to do so. Mechanisms ranging from conflict, climate, political persecution, right? This is something that the IOM is tasked with dealing with. I'd like just to hear maybe a little bit more, give us an introduction to what you do at the IOM, what the IOM is actually tasked with doing in this moment.
Thanks so much, Stacie, and it is just terrific to be here with you this evening, but I just wanted to say thank you to the fellows. the last couple of days with you all, and we have touched on many aspects of migration, of humanitarian work in the discussions around the projects, but you all have given me hope, inspiration, and energized me incredibly. I have so enjoyed our time together, so just thank you. So, who in the room has ever heard of IOM before this evening? Oh, wow, that's more than I usually get when I ask the question. So, as a Foreign Service officer, Stacie, across those 4 decades, I would see IOM in the field as a relatively small UN, affiliated agency. It only became a UN, part of the UN in 2016, but as a very operational, very efficient, on-the-ground, field-based, people-centric organization. So when I retired for the first time from the State Department just about a year ago, I joined IOM in February. I had been so impressed with IOM's work post-conflict in Sri Lanka, post-conflict in Lebanon, in Haiti, that I knew this was where my second career would begin. So for those of you who didn't raise your hands, the International Organization for Migration is the UN Migration Agency, operating in about 170 countries around the world, with about 550 field offices as well. So not just sitting in the capital with a handful of folks in the capital, but typically all across the countries in which we're working, serving these member states, working on topics from shelter for the internally displaced, water and sanitation in internally displacement sites, countering trafficking in persons, helping member state governments with border governance should they require that kind of support. So really across an expanse of issues. But IOM, I always think of as sort of the lean, mean machine on the ground.
See, I want to pick up on that because, you're using these words on the ground,
Yes.
in the field. I think oftentimes when we think about the United Nations, right, at least for me, that the first image, bureaucracy, New York, very distant actually from populations. But what you're describing is this really nimble organization that is in the community and maybe even responding to crises.
So we were talking at the table just a few minutes ago about Haiti, which is actually the only place I served twice as a first tour officer and then as an ambassador. Across the expanse of my career, only one country I served in twice, and that was Haiti. So Haiti today, about 1.4 million people displaced by gang violence. So IOM has 250 staff in country, working across 5 different regions, managing IDP sites, providing that badly needed shelter, mobile health clinics, and a variety of other urgent humanitarian needs. So when we talk about in the field, again, it's not 2 or 3 people dealing with the government sitting in a nice air-conditioned office. This is on the ground, helping people where they are. And this is a member state organization, so the IOM serves the member states. U.S. is a member state. You notice that it's a few less than the number of member states in the United Nations. There are some reasons for that, historical, we can go into after dessert, after we eat that delicious chocolate cake. But to me, the beauty of the work that IOM does is exactly that, Stacie. It is field-based, it is human-centric, really focused on preserving the dignity of the displaced person or the migrant and helping people where they are.
And can you tell us a bit about how your work happens with member states, in particular in a crisis? So, for example, one of the things, the last few months, I believe the United States has pledged $2 billion in order to assist in partner nations that are undergoing huge amounts of displacement. I believe there are 17 partner nations: Sudan, South Sudan, Honduras, El Salvador. Where does IOM fit in this? You're obviously on the ground. You're part of the infrastructure that could make that happen.
No, it's a great question. So on December 29th, the UN Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher, OCHA, signed an MOU with the Undersecretary for Foreign Assistance of the Department of State for, again, $2 billion, 17 hyper-prioritized countries. So this is the UN system writ large, because the humanitarian agencies, UNICEF, World Food Program, International Organization for Migration, we work together. We're not in competition. We're all part of one UN family. But the idea that the U.S. had was to focus attention on, or hyper-prioritize, these 17 locations. So Haiti is also one, but let's talk about Sudan. Very, very challenging environment with over 9 million people displaced today, and over half of them children. So fighting, fire, floods, that's all contributed to the displacement in Sudan. And again, there, IOM, as we are in many places in the world, has a big role in shelter. So that's the temporary shelter for people who have been displaced from their home communities. And with that, given the threat of cholera, diarrheal disease, that water and sanitation piece, latrines, clean water is another essential piece. Again, mobile medical clinics. So this, you're not reading about this in the front pages of the papers here. We're not seeing that when we pick up our phone and look at the news. But one of the biggest humanitarian emergencies right now, yes.
And yeah, we could probably have a very long discussion just about the lack of visibility of what's going on in Sudan, because it really is a catastrophe. When you get on the ground, I mean, these sound like massive operations. Right? You're a nimble operation, yet you're establishing all of this infrastructure. Just two questions on that. Right? First of all, just kind of how do you do it? And second of all, I'm curious as to, you obviously partner with member states. Who else is on the ground with you? I'm thinking about local communities, private corporations. Like who's there to get that infrastructure up?
Excellent question. And actually, this sort of touches on one of the presentations of the groups that we had this week with the Albright Fellows. One of the most important things is working with the displaced population, the migrant population themselves. What are their needs? So that it starts at that level, right? Because it's common sense, but it's also about dignity, and it's about accountability of those who are coming in to support and to help, to make sure that this is the support that is needed. So a lot of attention paid with the local communities, of course with women as well, because we find quite often a large proportion of female-headed households in displaced populations, for example. Certainly saw that in my experience in Sri Lanka, and IOM was doing great work there. So that's part one. So local communities and then local NGOs in the country in which we're operating. And then, as I mentioned, there are many UN agency funds and programs, World Food Program, UNICEF, and so forth. But we all have to be working together. And the UN does that in what we call a cluster system. So someone has the lead on shelter. That's usually IOM. We operate what we call a common pipeline in many locations so that all UN and international humanitarian, local humanitarian goods may be coming through a common pipeline for logistics and procurement, more effective, more efficient, better for the donors, whether it's World Bank, whether it's another member state. And you mentioned private sector, and I think this is really important. We talked today after one of the presentations about the importance of working with private sector. Sure, there may be corporate social responsibility, generosity in a cash infusion, and that's fantastic. But for example, Microsoft, AI for Good Lab. We talked about this in the Ethiopia food security example this afternoon, where IOM partnered with Microsoft's lab, took 10 years of satellite imagery, working with AI, really able to map out flood risk based on that data, looked at where farmers farmed, looked at where internally displaced were now, and we're then better able to advise the government and local authorities on how best to pre-position teams, pre-position goods for the next emergency. And that's due to a public-private partnership. A couple of months ago, hurricanes in the Caribbean, Airbnb partnered with us. So when first responders came into Jamaica, lodging was there. What an amazing idea. Who would have thought, right? Apple with supply chain matters, making sure that the standards and guidelines are being met. So education for mobile workers. The list goes on. And some of you may, and I'm talking to the students here, some of you may go into international organizations or academic institutions, but some of you may go into the private sector, of course. And we've spent the last couple of days talking about how we can show up and do good in this world. Well, we can do good in this world in our local communities, in our private sector positions. I mean, we follow our passion and we can do good in so many places with these partnerships.
And I think with so many different skills, right? Because as you were talking about Microsoft, I was reminded, I'll teach at least a little bit about migration in my world politics class. And one thing I try to impress upon people is almost the lack of information. I mean, if you think about, especially in moments of conflict and displaced people, right? How do you actually even know where people are? Right? Let's set aside, what do they need? How do you know where they are? Where are they going to go? Where are they likely to show up? And all of that requires real cooperation among people who can manage information.
So I'm going to put a plug in here, data. So we have, tracking mechanisms, displacement data, and this is, it's tough out there right now in the humanitarian space because the focus of so many member states, so many countries, budget discipline, there can be donor fatigue for a certain crisis because the crisis has been going on for a very long time, perhaps. So the focus is on life-saving, like immediate life-saving, and of course, food assistance, life-saving, a tent when there's been a flood, life-saving, medical medicines, life-saving. But then how are member states, how are countries going to make good policy if they don't have the data? How are you moving beyond the immediate crisis into and building something better without the data? So this is actually A big part of what we do in our global office in Washington is working with, say, the World Bank or the Inter-American Development Bank, going to Capitol Hill and explaining why the investment needs also to be in this area, because you really cannot make good policy if this is the part of the budget that gets cut.
Yeah, and to realize too that so much of these international institutions are about information, as they not to take away from the action part, that's part of it, but actually being able to coordinate around a series of what's known and what you can act on is so important. And that actually brings me to in some ways what is an obvious question, but I think is an important one, which is, I think about your career. You've moved back and forth between being a representative of the United States in many of your roles as an ambassador, but also somebody who's worked very deeply within international institutions, and particularly the UN organization, right? You were the deputy permanent representative to the United Nations. Obviously, now you're in the role. What would you say in terms of, as people become more skeptical of multilateral organizations, more skeptical of the United Nations, what case would you make for strengthening them?
Well, you look at the challenges that the world is facing. It can be daunting getting up in the morning and seeing the latest hotspot, the news. And the gut feeling is no one nation can solve any of this alone. We really do have to work together. Now, the UN, the United Nations, is an imperfect institution, but what is the UN? It's all of the member states. We put up a mirror. It's all of the member states. So we are all in this together. Now, that does not mean that we as citizens shouldn't be pushing big UN or any UN agency funder program to be more impactful, more effective, more efficient. We should be pushing for reforms. It makes sense. These are our taxpayer dollars, right? Funding these programs. So absolutely, we should insist on performance. But at the same time, that space to not just coordinate policy and programs, but also to give the space for the country in which the crisis is happening to have their voice heard as well. That's the beauty of the United Nations, countries large and small. But again, I'm under no illusions from having served as a U.S. representative to the United Nations, and now inside the system, the people of the world, the people without a voice, the most vulnerable, they deserve better, and they deserve a UN that delivers.
So actually starting with going to the other part of this, moving back and forth between the multilateral and representing the country. You were a Foreign Service officer beginning at the age of 22. I'd like you we're just going to start there. I'd like you to pick up on that and talk about what brought you to the Foreign Service. And once you were there, because I know we can stumble into a lot at 22, you've made a good decision. What kept you there?
So with apologies to the fellows, because we talked about this a little bit, so I'll give like a truncated version. Again, for the seniors, in January of my senior year here on campus, I did not have a clear plan. I was very interested in public service, but at that point I was like, gosh, do I go to law school and fight for justice? Oh gosh, I love to write. Is journalism something I want to pursue so I can shine the spotlight on these issues of urgency? And there was also the piece of me that I had traveled quite a bit. My dad's from the Philippines. My other grandfather was from Portugal. My other grandmother was from Lithuania. What a mix, right? My parents met in Cambridge. So, but I had traveled a lot growing up, and the world is a big place. And the more I learned about the Foreign Service, the more this idea appealed to me of being part of this, of actually, even at 22, as a very junior person in the Foreign Service, representing our country, the United States, overseas. So I joined several months after graduation, had taken the written exam while I was still up here, then the oral exam. And as I mentioned to a few of you, everybody in those days seemed to be going to a commercial bank or an investment bank training program. And I did sort of think, well, I'll try out the Foreign Service for 4 or 5 years, and if I don't like it, maybe I can sort of pick up again. And I wasn't 100% sold at 22, but boy, a few months, well, not even a few months, I would say a few days after I got to Haiti in my first assignment, I realized this was for me. I enjoyed the cross-cultural piece of this, not only working, I was in the political section working with, Haitian journalists and labor activists and human rights defenders, but inside an embassy, the staff from the country greatly outnumbers the number of Americans, so there's a cross-cultural aspect to that. And then we call in U.S. embassies, it's a country team. Everything is focused on the team. It's not about individual accomplishment. The ethos is about a team, and that really appealed to me. And that's what kept me in the Foreign Service for almost 43 years, a very long time.
So you're talking about the cross-cultural part, right? And that's impressive already, just thinking you do it once. You did it again and again and again, right? So you were in Haiti, you were in Sri Lanka, you were in Lebanon, and not only were you doing this in multiple spaces, so you had the learning different cultures and learning to use that barriers, you were also dealing with multiple different types of issues and conflicts. How did you keep going over that learning curve? I mean, that just seems practically impossible to me.
I think the most essential attribute for anyone looking to join diplomatic service or the Foreign Service really is just curiosity, natural curiosity, an insatiable curiosity. So actually, Haiti, they came into our, this is the first tour, they came into our training classroom in our introductory course and said, who already speaks French and who can be ready to go in a couple of weeks? You don't have to stay for like the full 6 months of all these courses. And my hand shot up because I was 22 and I was in Washington, but I'd grown up in the Washington, D.C. area. And they were like, great, we'll teach you Creole when you get there. So 5 weeks later, boom, I was there. And working both on migration issues and human rights issues, and working with civil society and some very courageous people. This was back in a long time ago, in the baby doc days, right, in Haiti, a very long time ago. But I was so seized with the history of the Haitian people that I decided I needed to see where a significant number of the population had originally come from. So I wanted to go to West Africa. I mean, most of my travel growing up had been to Europe and East Asia. I'd never been to West Africa. And so there is an element of choice. And I ended up doing economic development and political analysis work for the next several years in Lomé, Togo, in Cotonou, Benin, went down a little to Central Africa, Douala, Cameroon, and then to Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire. So the next decade following up on that. But it was really that seed that was planted in Haiti then, and I'm not gonna bore you with 43 years of like where I was, but I think it's so. It is. I had a wake-up call from the acting director of the Foreign Service, who was looking at where I might go next, and it was a very good position still overseas in our Africa Bureau. But she says, you're kind of doing the same thing again and again. You're using those French language skills in so many of these countries, and you're flexing those economic analysis muscles. You need to shake it up a little bit. I was like, oh my gosh. She was the National Security Council Director for Africa and a former several-time ambassador to Africa, and she's telling me this. So that was something. Mm-hmm. And I took that, and I'll be perfectly honest. Part of that was, by that time, Stacie, we were talking about our kids. By that time, I had 2 elementary school kids, so I was like, it's fine being a little comfortable because there's a lot going on when you've got 2 kids under.
It's like, no, the routine is fine, thank you.
But I did take the advice and ended up going to South India, to Chennai, as the principal officer of a constituent post, so sort of a branch office of the embassy. And that was a game changer, because then I went on India, Pakistan, back to the South Asia Bureau. So it was a real change, but it was someone saying, don't get complacent. And we talked about this in the chat yesterday morning with the fellows. Sometimes it can be scary doing something that's going to be new, or a switch. But it is good for you.
Yeah, those learning curves might actually be what life is actually made of. But again, this is a big one, right? So if I'm thinking about you then moving from doing economic analysis and thinking about development into these really incredible conflict situations. How do you, for lack of a better way of putting it, reorient your brain? How do you learn about this? As you step in, for example, let's just say, as you step into Sri Lanka, what are the steps you are taking, right, to make sure that you can approach this with expertise, which is really what you need to do. That's who you need to become.
So you mentioned Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
So, very complicated time, because I came in pretty immediately post-conflict. But having served in South India, a very short distance away, had been watching that situation and that conflict for some time from India, and then as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for South Asia. So in preparing for that particular tour, meeting with diaspora groups back in the United States, meeting with a lot of people who had done quite a lot of academic research on what had led to the conflict. And of course, all of this is tied, even though my early tours were, economic analysis focused, so many conflicts do have root causes in related issues. In the work that I'm doing now, also the typical IOM, International Organization for Migration, colleague will spend 3 or 4 years in one crisis area and then may move all the way around the world. And yes, there is language training, and yes, there are certainly resources to build up skill sets. But a lot of this really has to be that natural curiosity that you're going to go the extra mile and talk to every single person that you think, do a lot of reading on your own. And then when you get there, very humbly, not be on transmit. I know you guys heard me say this the last couple of days, but be actively listening. You can't land someplace and be on transmit. You have got to sit on that balcony and listen first.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about those skills, but first I have to ask, because you have talked, obviously, you were a young woman when you entered the Foreign Service. You mentioned you have kids that you're moving around. The Foreign Service has a lot of virtues, but was not always known as being the most welcoming place for women and certainly mothers. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and how you managed that?
So I'm happy to say today, Stacie, and I was over at our National Foreign Affairs Training Center teaching a course just last week, and for the last several years, this has been a very different picture. But certainly, when I joined in 1982, the number of women in the entering class was quite a small percentage. The number who were still in 10 years later, even smaller. I was saying at the dinner table that I joined the State Department just a couple of years after, this was pre the last Foreign Service Act, that a woman, when she got married, used to have to leave. So we were still in the first couple of years after that. So, a sea change. Very, very different now. Maybe because I was going to some of the smaller posts at the time, Lomé, Cotonou, Douala. And so, you show what you can do. You are an essential part of that country team. And that built my confidence maybe to sail on later to some of the bigger jobs.
So you felt in many ways like you'd gotten rooted in the Foreign Service, you knew how it operated, so you in many ways had your own grounding that you could bring from place to place.
And I think the other piece was just building those leadership and management skills through a variety. I wasn't in a rush. I mean, obviously, I spent 43 years. That's a long career. But I think building those foundational, the building blocks, managing smaller teams, then managing larger teams, because it's not all about highfalutin policy. If you can't manage your team to deliver the results, it's not really going to matter.
Right. So now thinking about these skills, and I want to turn to maybe how you learn them. And I want to start with something that I think everybody knows, which is that Michele is a Wellesley alum, class of 1981. So curious as to if you can speak about what skills you may have developed as a college student at Wellesley, what you learned from Wellesley, either substantively or in terms of things that you're talking about, collaboration, teams, all of that.
So there is another 81 alum in here. Marianne, thank you for coming out. I had mentioned to some of the fellows that while I was here, I was very quiet, very introverted, spent a lot of time at the library, and was very serious about my studies, but I lacked the confidence for I would say, until senior year. I don't know what happened, but until senior year, to really to bring that voice, and there was a shift and a change, and maybe because I realized I was not doing myself any favors by sort of not expressing my thoughts, but I was quite quiet. But what I learned here was, I'm laughing because we talked about this: prepare. And maybe that's a trait that many of you in the audience, and I still over-prepare for things. But when I prepare and over-prepare, then I come in with confidence. So to do the research, to do the work, and then you've got the confidence to go in and nail it, right?
I mean, it's interesting, right? And I think this is really important because obviously there's a fair amount that we all place on things like, okay, it's important to network, it's important to build relationships, and all this is true. It's important to speak out. But it's also just really important to prepare and know your stuff. So that would be something, and maybe it was good that you were an introvert and in the library and learning how to prepare at that moment, right?
Well, and I can tell you, when you go into a negotiation and you have sat with your team and you have really prepared for this option, or if it goes this way or this path, you've mapped it out and it's in your head. So yes, I think it is a skill that could be underrated. interesting to think about it that way in terms of negotiations, which of course we do in so many areas of our life, but in the UN context, and certainly in the Security Council work I did as the Deputy Perm Rep up in New York, that amount of preparation before going into a negotiation was essential, and a certain dramatic flair sometimes too.
But you're also making me think and kind of run through. I mean, obviously, so Secretary Albright, when she was here, she would spend a lot of time with this program, and she would spend a lot of time talking about the skills that were necessary to bring to the table as a diplomat. And, some of them were the typical, national security toolbox or military tools, economic. Some of them were how you carried yourself, and actually to this point, she would say, "But everybody should speak up, but before you open your mouth, you better know what you're talking about." But one that always stuck out to me a lot was empathy, right? For everything that she did, for negotiating with people like Assad, for negotiating with North Korea, she would stress the importance of empathy in her work. And I'm curious as to the role you see empathy playing in your role as a diplomat, and if you're willing to talk about it, if there was any particular moment that you really had to kind of dig deep to figure out how to be empathetic even while still holding on to your principles.
Yeah, I mean, that point on empathy and compassion, couldn't agree more. And of course, heard Secretary Albright expound upon that many times also. So a couple of years back, this is some time ago, in New York, there was a traveling show of Norman Rockwell works. And there's a drawing that Norman Rockwell did many decades ago of I guess it would be Soviet, US, UK, and they're in the Security Council, these ambassadors, in this very serious discussion. But behind them, you see a hungry mother, a wounded man, a child, a weary peacekeeper. You see all of these vulnerable people with no voice. And I loved that Norman Rockwell work, because it's not about scoring points in some debate at the UN or passing a resolution that's just words. It's really about giving voice and giving hope and giving support to those most vulnerable people all around the world. And so that idea of empathy and compassion really has to guide us in so much of the work that we do in our local communities, in our day jobs, because at the end of the day, that's really what it's all about. And it also was kind of, for me, what gets me excited getting up in the morning. I want to make a difference. I think all of us want to make a difference, right? And sometimes it is hard, because that well of compassion and empathy can run a little dry sometimes if you burn yourself out. So I think it's very important to guard against that as well.
But that was the next question I was going to ask you, right? Because, you're doing hard work, right? You're doing extraordinarily hard work in places and moments where, we often talk about solutions. In complex problems, there aren't solutions. There are trade-offs, right? And you've done this year after year, place after place. How do you maintain that resilience?
So some of it is really common sense, stuff your mom told you and tells you, eat right, get enough sleep, for sure, because if you're not taking care of yourself, and especially in these crisis situations, it's all too easy to, do these 14, 16-hour days, get a couple of hours of sleep and then get right back up again. That's not sustainable over a long period. So self-care, having a great network, and I can see many great networks. The group of 40 fellows 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you're going to have this network, which is so precious and so valuable. But having your network of people you trust and can confide in and bounce stuff off of is so important as well. But before you think of all that, it's also just like to know when you need to take a break, to know when you need to step away. So that may be, a short vacation, but it may be saying, I've given it my all for 2 years or 3 years or 6 months, and I'm not going to be able to function at this level and give it my best if I don't switch to another area, switch to another job. So actually being very honest with yourself of knowing when it's time to make a switch so that you can recharge those batteries and then come back or go on to another challenge.
Just kind of thinking about the role of networks, right? And kind of that's a place where you recharge. Those are the people who really keep you grounded. And I think about that again with Madeline Albright and her vast networks, some of whom are sitting here tonight. You move all the time. How have you maintained that network? How do you make sure that you have that support?
So I am so blessed to live, within 15 miles of 3 of my best friends from 3rd grade. So they keep me honest. I'm very blessed that also in the DC area there are a number of Wellesley friends as well. So that's also a blessing. That keeps you grounded. I think the temptation for so many of us is just to run so fast that we don't sort of stop and not only appreciate each other but actually appreciate, if I could say, ourselves. Just to give ourselves our own gold star, give ourselves our own pat on the back, and say, you did something good today. You're doing well, and then move on rather than just rushing ahead. And I think that's something that I've learned, that maybe that was very nice to hear the list of awards, but we're not always going to get an award or a certificate. Sometimes we have to give ourselves our own gold star because we know that we just made a difference, and we're not going to have to depend on that external affirmation, but we know it, right?
Absolutely. I know we're coming up on time, so I do want to ask one more question. You've stressed throughout that you can make a difference no matter what you decide to do. You can be in the private sector, you can be in an NGO, you can be working in your local community, your own family, it doesn't matter. But it really is admirable how much you've given to public service and how much you've done as a civil servant. So I'm wondering, for people who might feel disconnected from public service, who might feel disconnected right now from these civic institutions, what advice would you give them? What encouragement might you give them to think about moving down that path?
Whether it's NGO work, whether it's private sector, whether it's public service, my advice to the students, to the fellows, find something that you can feel passionate and excited about. It's not about checking the box because you figured this step and then this step will get you to this place 5 years later. Just go for what you really feel excited and passionate about, because it will show. And the excitement that you bring will be contagious. You will inspire others, and those ripples will also make a difference. Public service can be very challenging. I was so impressed last week while I was over with some newly minted Foreign Service and Civil Service officers over at the State Department's National Affairs Training Center, that some had come after a teaching career. There are many second careers. Some had come after working for foundations. One had just spent a couple of years in Ukraine in humanitarian work. But this calling for public service, and I know we've got a very multinational audience here tonight, also of fellows and friends. So I'm talking about public service in your country, or for the international organizations in the United Nations. Very satisfying, very challenging, not without frustrations, but 4 decades down the road, I hope those of you who spent the last couple days with me, I am absolutely genuine. I relish getting up in the morning, getting in and speaking at very early hours with our teams all over the world, doing this on-the-ground work with local communities, meeting internally displaced or migrants where they are so that they have more dignity, more self-sufficiency, and maybe don't have to make a dangerous onward journey, that they can succeed and thrive where they are. So this public service calling, I'm throwing it out to you, juniors and seniors who have been in the program. Please, please, please consider it. Women in public service, so important.
Michele, I can't thank you enough, because I think about this moment, and to be able to have you as the face of government service, the face of civic service, the face of international organizations, I think in and of itself reminds us why this is so important. So thank you for being who you are. Thank you for the work that you have done. And if you'll all join me, please, in thanking.
Thank you, Stacie. Thank you, guys.
It falls on me to close this incredible session. Thank you so much. I will gush a little bit about you as I stand here a little more. I know that Michele said that she does not need external affirmation, but there will be coming. So just wait. Well, yes, as I said, it falls on me to close this remarkable event, this incredible dinner dialogue and the winter session. And it's bittersweet. It's bittersweet as we close. But this year it marks a particularly meaningful winter session for us, because we are celebrating Wellesley's 150th anniversary as well. And what a pleasure it is to have a Wellesley alumna here as our distinguished visiting professor. Our first, actually, I believe, as an alumna. So this is just a wonderful time to, reflect on leadership and what it looks like. And so thank you so much for this incredible conversation, Stacie and Michele. I'm just bowled over by how inspiring it was and how hopeful. So thank you so much for closing in this way. So Michele, I just wanted to particularly thank you, because not only were you an amazing speaker and speaking from your heart, but also such a role model to the fellows this past 2 days, which felt really like 2 weeks, but really it was just 2 days, and we could probably spend 2 weeks with you or more. In my research, I studied gender gaps and how we close them, and I believe that role models and mentoring is one really real way. It's evidence-based, to close those gender gaps in male-dominated spaces, which of course foreign service is, and so many others. And you being such a role model, modeling leadership in a way that is not command and control, what we see in the media, but really with empathy, integrity, and true and true meaning. So thank you for bringing that to us. This was really incredible. And Stacie, thank you so much for your leadership at the college, continuing supporting Albright Institute and Wellesley in the world, and for leading this conversation so beautifully. So more thank yous to come. like I said, please bear with me. I will continue. And I think first and foremost for the rest of it is to honor Secretary Madeleine Albright and her legacy and her generosity and vision that brought us all here together. And it's a lasting investment and wisdom that she did, really. It wasn't a building, right? It wasn't something physical, but it was much more meaningful, intangible. It was the gift of wisdom, imagination, and the hope for future generation of leaders and change makers. And this vision lives on in the people who knew her best. And I will echo, Stacie and Courtney and everybody in thanking Winnie Freund, her best and dearest friend, who is here with us and keeps coming to Wintersessions. This is the 17th time that she's here with us, and it's just amazing. Thank you so much, Winnie. And also, we're deeply grateful to the Albright family. Alice Albright is here with us today, but her extended family and friends in supporting and guiding the strategy for the Albright Institute in the future. I also wanted to acknowledge an individual who, of course, brought the original vision of Madeleine Albright to fruition as the original faculty director of the Albright Institute in 2010, Professor Joe Joyce. He was my professor in economics when I was a student here, but also this visionary who implemented Albright for us. He's retiring this year, so it's just an incredible honor to have him and honor him as well. So, yes, you're irreplaceable for sure, and I hope you'll come back to us as emeritus faculty with your incredible research that's ongoing as well. So we're also grateful to the extended Albright family, which includes everyone who has serves now, and will continue to serve as the Albright Ambassador Council members, offering invaluable guidance and support and mentorship to our fellows. So thank you all so much as well. As well as, the faculty. When I became the faculty director, we decided to kind of expand Albright to include more faculty perspectives and support faculty. So we have a lot of faculty affiliates here with us today. So thank you all so much, especially those of you who are also taking on a student researcher and working on your research with Albright support. We hope to continue that program in the future. And during my time as the faculty director, I'm reminded again and again in the strength of teams in the institution and how important it is. It's really at the heart of our mission to lead collaboratively, right? It's the mission of Wellesley, it's the mission of the Albright Institute. So I'm eternally grateful for the partnership and friendship that I found in my partner in crime, Katie Michaels, the new program director, not so new anymore, I guess, but we're both new, so we learned together. And also, no matter how strong the leadership is of an institution, it's also important to have the backbone, and that is, the teams who are behind the scenes as well. So I want to recognize Julie Lanza and Beth Robichaud, who are truly, again, like the backbone, really, of Albright. They're just tireless. Their institutional knowledge, you don't even know how much they're doing for us. They're collaborative, they're amazing, they're just logistics geniuses that make this all run. I don't know if Katie and I would know where we would be without them at any point in time. Also, this goes to other Wellesley staff, including, of course, our dining staff, our custodians, and as well as our wonderful LTS. Experts here. Yeah, you're recording, I'm being recorded right now, which I hate seeing myself on video, but we appreciate this. But yes, they're recording our sessions, so all the sessions will be available on YouTube, so you just know that, and so that's thanks to them. Finally, last but not least, a special shout out to the students, really, our fellow mentors, student assistants. Thank you all so much for applying to be fellows, to be part of this program, for showing up, supporting one another, even when it was really hard, especially as the news are coming out, all these difficult news every single day bombarding us. You still persevered, and we really appreciate you being part of this community and supporting one another. And the program really would, I was just reflecting on this, it really would not exist without you. It's for you, but it's really by you. It really is. And that's what makes it special. That's what makes the Institute special. It's you. And now you're joining a network of over 600 fellows in the world out there. So please keep in touch with them as well. So thank you all for being here. I ran way too long, but I want to gush. So thank you for being here in person, on live stream, and have a great rest of your evening. Thank you so much.